Hey everyone, it's Nick here with Montgomery Financial with your Q3 coaching class. I hope you have all had a great summer so far, and thank you for tuning in to our Q3 coaching class for 2023. Today's topic is not our typical or regularly scheduled programming, not in the typical subject matter that we would go over for our clients. We're actually throwing it way back to the basics, and today we are going to discuss Retirement Planning 101. All right, so the goal is to go over the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why when it comes to retirement planning. And really the ideal audience for this video, well, I hope that there's some useful information that our clients can get out of this. That would be great. Really the ideal audience would be, someone who's a little bit younger and the younger generations. So our hope is that you maybe forward this video. You can share the YouTube link. You can forward this over to maybe your kids, your grandchildren, someone or someone who would benefit from, the information that we have, which is just going over really the basics of when it comes to how to think about and how to save for retirement. Okay, so that's the goal. It's important as well that I give you a little bit of context as to why Jeff and I wanted to head in this direction for our coaching class this quarter. Really mainly because what we have found is that this day and age, the younger generations aren't really being taught about financial planning, more specifically retirement planning. So I'm not sure if all of our clients know this, but in the fall of last year, fall of 2022, we actually sponsored a financial planning or introduction to financial planning or financial literacy rather for a group of middle schoolers over at Stephen Decatur Middle School, which was great. I actually taught the course. So for about maybe 8 to 10 weeks, I was in there every week teaching financial literacy, and we had a great time. I hope the kids learned a lot. I learned a lot from them, but it was definitely clear that there's it's lacking. Our education system is lacking in that area by preparing, the younger generations for how to think about just financial planning in general. So that's why we kind of wanted to do this and throw it back to the basics. So if we take a look here at what I have planned for us to go over, really I want to, again, focus on the why when it comes to retirement planning. Why should we think about retirement planning? Why is it important? And then we will jump into the idea of paying yourself first, which is something that my parents had always told me, pay yourself first. So the concept of that, and that will be looking at the specific types of savings plans that you'll have access to in retirement, and then giving a very brief introduction to investments. And then we're going to tie it all together with a case study, okay? And then any kind of questions that folks have, feel free to drop that in the comments section here, and I'll also summarize it at the end, okay? So let's start out with the beginning or the basics here of, why exactly is it important to plan for retirement, all right? What's the purpose? And let me start off by saying, I believe that it really is never too late and never too early to start thinking and planning for retirement. So again, this is out there. This is pointed directly at, the younger generations here. It may seem crazy to think about retirement. You might be in your early 20s and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not even going to think about retiring for 30 plus years. But I'm sure your parents will tell you, your grandparents will tell you that time comes quick, all right? It flies by. I can't tell you how many clients of mine say, oh, I'm retiring today, but I remember my first job that I started, 30 years ago. It felt like it was yesterday. So this does go by quickly. And on that same token, on the other side of the coin, it really is never too late to start either. So if you're watching this and you haven't gotten, a jump on retirement planning just yet, and you're a little bit older, it really is never too late. So I take this stuff very seriously when it comes to thinking about retirement, because it's important to prepare yourself to when you get to that point, okay? Speaking of which, let's actually define retirement, okay? This is the Webster's Dictionary official definition of retirement, which is the action or act of leaving one's job and ceasing to work, all right? That's how it's defined, but I would think of it this way. Slightly different definition here, my definition, if you will, which is I define retirement as being able to get to that point in life when work is optional, okay? Or some people would refer to it as a work optional lifestyle. Because let's be honest, not everybody's going to retire, whether that's out of necessity because they need to keep working, okay, or just out of their preference. Maybe they prefer to continue to work, to stay busy. All right, we've heard folks use the term, my second act, okay, or an encore job, or they just need to keep themselves busy, so they're going to continue to work. So that's why I like this definition of retirement slightly better, because it's being able to have that luxury in life where working is completely optional. If you want to work, by all means, you can. If you don't want to, then again, you have that luxury where you don't have to work. But here's the thing. When you retire, you're still going to have expenses, okay? You're still going to have bills to pay. You're still going to have things, you're going to have a need for income to pay those expenses. So some quick statistics here on what expenses will look like in retirement. You can see that it may not be as inexpensive as you thought. You're still going to have a lot of expenses when it comes to retiring. And here's the thing about retirement, right, is that you may get to a point when you're not working anymore. You now have more time to do those things that you always wanted to do. We talk about it a lot with our clients. Those first years of retirement, those are your go-go years. You have the energy, the time, hopefully the money as well, to go and enjoy yourself. So we sometimes find that expenses are even higher than they were during your non-retirement years. They're higher in those initial retirement years, okay? So you have to factor that in. You might be spending a little bit more money in retirement. And right, that could be a number of things. That could be taking that trip to that place that you wanted to go. Maybe it's Europe. Maybe it's, just inter-US travel, domestic travel. Maybe you have those grandkids that you want to spoil, right? That's most common typically, is wanting to spoil those grandkids. Or maybe it's a boat or a second home, whatever it may be. You may find that your retirement's going to be a little bit more expensive than you thought about before, okay? So the question is, well, how can you then afford to pay for these expenses? How can you afford to stop working and then transition to, again, that work optional lifestyle and still meet your expenses and maybe even meet some increased expenses? Well, of course, you're going to need a retirement income plan. Okay, so that's what we do a lot for our clients. And again, if you're not a client of ours watching this, it's important that I give you context as to how we think about retirement income planning, okay? How we think about how to supplement your lifestyle when we get to that work optional lifestyle. So this is what it looks like. It's a very antiquated sort of analogy that financial professionals use to explain retirement income planning, but I still think, even though it is antiquated, it still serves a good purpose, all right? And that is the infamous three-legged stool, okay? The idea that a retirement plan is like a three-legged stool supported by three main sources of income: Social Security, which we'll go into briefly today and talk about how Social Security plays a role in a retirement income plan; personal savings, okay, which is going to be money that you set aside in an IRA, a 401k, or any kind of a savings vehicle; and then income from pensions, all right, pension income. So the idea is that your retirement sits on this stool supported by Social Security, pension income, and personal savings, and that is how you're able to fund your lifestyle in retirement. That is how you're able to pay for those expenses, okay? Now, we're really going to focus on two areas today mainly: Social Security and personal savings. And really, Social Security is going to be a small part of this. We're more so going to focus on the second, the latter, which is personal savings. And we're not going to talk a whole lot about pensions, and here's why. Pensions, they're unfortunately a thing of the past, okay? Not a lot of folks have pensions these days, and if you're starting out in the work world, you may notice that your company or wherever you work doesn't even offer a pension. So typically, unless you're very fortunate, very blessed to have a company that still has a pension, or if you work for maybe a state entity or a federal government, or you're a firefighter, a police officer, those type of public entities there, or government entities, if you will, you're most likely not going to have access to a pension, okay? So you're going to focus more so on, again, your stool's going to look like a two-legged stool. You're going to be focused more so on Social Security and personal savings. That's what you're going to be more reliant on, okay? So this is really just meant to be a kind of an intro to Social Security, because again, not a lot of information or education out there on how the system works from a very basic view here, okay, or a high-level view. So the idea of Social Security is that this is really like your pension, all right? offered by the government, sponsored by the federal government, and it's a system that you pay into your entire life, okay, your entire working years. Roughly 6.2% of each paycheck that you get is going to go into Social Security, and in order to be fully covered by the system, you have to pay in for 10 years or 40 quarters worth of paying into the system. And then at the end, when you go ahead and start collecting benefits, all right, they take your 35 highest earning years throughout your work history, they index that for inflation, they apply their special formula to it to give you the pension amount that you would then receive when you start collecting, okay? Now, when exactly can you start collecting? Well, you have a couple options. You can collect at age 62, which would be the earliest you can collect your benefits. You can collect as late as age 70, or you can collect anywhere in between. Now with Social Security, they define what's called your full retirement age, okay, which is for most folks around age 67, okay, maybe a little bit different if you were born a little bit earlier, but usually 67 is your full retirement age, and that is the age at which you can receive full Social Security benefits, okay, full Social Security benefits. If you start collecting before your full retirement age, so if you start collecting at 62 or 63, 64, you're going to receive a lesser amount, okay, lesser benefit. You're not going to receive that full retirement benefit. Now, if you wait until your full retirement age or after, okay, you're going to receive a larger benefit. There's a hypothetical chart up here that I'll pull up just to give you an idea of what that benefit could look like, okay, and the effect of collecting the benefit early, or at your full retirement age, or even at age 70, okay? So average Social Security benefit, and this is in today's dollars, all right? So you got to keep in mind, and we're going to go over the concept of time value of money and inflation in a second here, but keep in mind that these are 2023 dollars, okay? Typical person's going to receive around $20,000 to maybe $25,000 in benefits from Social Security, okay? So when you look at that, you think, okay, one source of income in retirement is going to come from Social Security. That's my source of income. The issue is that it may not be enough to meet your living expenses, all right? We went over some numbers earlier. I flashed up some numbers on the screen earlier about what retirement expenses may look like. Again, keep in mind that that's not one size fits all. Those might be even a little bit higher for folks. You can see that anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 in Social Security alone would not be enough to cover all your expenses, okay? So keep that in mind. Social Security is typically only supplemental. So then what's the second leg of the stool that we're going to rely on, all right? If all you have is Social Security, the only other thing you're going to have then to rely on would be personal savings, okay? So personal savings can take many different forms, all right? And that's money that you set aside out of your paycheck or when you get paid. A couple different types of accounts that you can have. You can have, of course, money at the bank, so savings accounts, checking accounts, CDs, money market accounts. You can have what we call brokerage accounts that can be held in an individual capacity or even a joint brokerage account. HSAs and FSAs are going to be health savings accounts, and then flexible savings accounts, so more geared towards planning for healthcare expenses, those type of accounts. Deferred compensation plans, okay, so that's going to be something offered by your workplace. Insurance and annuities are also other savings vehicles. And then the bottom two bullet points here, 401ks, 403bs, 457bs, TSAs and TSPs are all tax advantage work accounts. And then that last bullet point, IRAs, simple IRAs, and then Roth IRAs are going to be retirement planning accounts that you can open up on your own. So we're going to come back to this because we're going to focus really on the last two bullet points today, talking specifically about retirement specific plans that you can set up to save for retirement. But here's the idea. All throughout your working years, you may have access to all these different types of accounts. You want to save into these accounts so that in the future, when you get to that work optional lifestyle, you have this as a cushion, or a nest egg is a common term that we use, to draw from to supplement your retirement in addition to Social Security. So it's going to be your nest egg and Social Security. If you're fortunate enough to have a pension, you'd have that as well. And that's what a retirement income plan will look like very roughly. Okay? Great chart here as well. This is a cool chart that I found that really goes over the generational difference in how different generations are viewing what their retirement is going to potentially look like, okay? So we have all the way from millennials to Gen Xers to baby boomers, just understanding how reliant they're going to be on various retirement income sources. So what you'll notice here, what I found interesting at least, was the heavy reliance from the baby boomer generation on Social Security and pensions, so that's that light blue and that orange bar, versus when you go back a generation to Gen X and then over to millennials, how that reliance on Social Security drops significantly, okay? This is how they're thinking about, this is how folks are thinking about retirement, okay? As well as the pension bar, that orange bar decreasing heavily, mainly because, again, pensions are, like I said earlier, a thing of the past. And then conversely, millennials and Gen Xers more so thinking about saving into retirement plans like 401ks and personal savings, but just an interesting generational shift here that we're seeing, okay? So let's go over to section 2 here, which is what we're gonna go over the concept of paying yourself first, okay? And then looking at the various types of savings plans that you'll have access to, and then just a brief overview of investments, okay? And it's important that I start out by going over the difference there. Okay, the difference of saving versus investing, all right? And this will be very important when you get out into the work world, you're making money, the difference of saving and investing, all right? Because I would define saving as the act of setting money aside into an account for the future, okay? That's just setting money aside, where investing is placing the money into various investments in the hope that they will grow over the long term. So, okay, huge difference, again, between saving and investing that I want to point out. And the way that I like to use this analogy, I kind of came up with this, which is the idea of there are different savings accounts, okay? And then there are different types of investments that can go inside that account. Because a lot of times I'll have, maybe even a lot of younger clients that we have will ask me, you know, what's a better return? And some older clients ask this as well. What gets me a better return, a 401k or a Roth IRA? And there's a misconception there because it's not the 401k or the Roth IRA that gets the return. That's not what grows necessarily. It's what goes inside that account. So I've come up with this analogy here. It's the idea of a bowl and then what goes inside the bowl, all right? The bowl is the type of account that you have, okay? And we went over it earlier, all the various types of an account you can have. You can have accounts at the bank, you can have 401ks, IRAs. Those are all the type of bowls that you have, okay? The cereal in this picture is the investment, okay? That's what goes inside the account, okay? And that's what actually grows and fluctuates and appreciates based on the type of investment that it is. All right, so you can have many different types of bowls, which we'll go over, and then many, many different types of cereals or things that can go inside the bowl that then affect how it grows. So I hope that analogy is helpful. We'll come back to that concept in a minute here when we go over both types of accounts, types of bowls, and then types of investments or types of cereal. But you might be asking yourself the question of, well, why wouldn't I just keep the money in cash or just keep it in the bank? Why don't I just save and not invest, okay? Well, of course, everyone's heard about it over the past couple of years. Inflation, right? The cost of goods rising is the main reason you wouldn't just want to keep the money in the bank, okay? And just as a refresher, inflation is the idea that cost of goods go up incrementally each year. It's tied to what's called the CPI or Consumer Price Index. And it's the idea that, you know, let's just use, I have actually an example here of coffee, okay? That, you know, $1.85 that you spend on coffee in today's dollars, that cup of coffee wasn't always $1.85, all right? Back in this example, this is a very, I think, broad hypothetical example. You know, back in 1970, that cup of coffee was only a quarter, okay? So I'm sure everyone can remember those stories that maybe their parents or grandparents told them about, and when they would go out to eat, right, at a diner or something, you know, a burger cost a nickel. All right, or you went to the movie theater, a ticket cost a quarter. Obviously, the cost of goods go up incrementally each year. That's really how I could sum up inflation for you. So the issue is that the money in the bank, okay, the money in the bank does not go up with inflation. Of course, a lot of bank accounts, savings accounts, checking accounts will pay a certain interest rate to have the money sitting there. but it's not anywhere near what the average rate of inflation is, okay? And inflation on average is around 3.6%. Okay, 3.69% to be exact is kind of the traditional figure for inflation, which is funny because it used to, we used to think that was a little high. After these past couple years, that's kind of getting closer to the mark. So I use 3.6% as an idea. The money that you have in the bank is not going to typically grow at 3.6% if it's just sitting in a checking account or a savings account. Now CDs, money market accounts, which are all usually typically investments offered by the bank, those are seeing some more favorable rates right now. That mainly has to do with interest rates and what the Fed does. But typically, the money just sitting in the bank is not going to keep pace with inflation. Okay, so that's why it's important to invest the funds, maybe in a CD or a money market account. But when we look at long-term investing, okay, retirement planning investing more specifically, it isn't going to cut it. We got to look at some other alternatives, okay? So another quick note, Social Security actually does have what's called a cost of living adjustment, okay, which is the idea that as inflation goes up, typically Social Security will keep pace with that slightly. That's what's called a cost of living adjustment or a COLA. Cash in the bank does not have a COLA, okay? So keep that in mind. So let's go over some of the different types of bowls that you would have access to before we go over the cereal inside the bowl, because again, we already know we can't just let the money sit in cash. We need to invest it. But let's talk about the different types of accounts that you can have. And we're going to go over today really just more so specifically retirement bowls, if you will, okay? And I would really break it down to there are two categories of retirement plans or retirement accounts. There are going to be your employee-sponsored plans, employer-sponsored plans, which are offered through the workplace, okay? And then there are going to be self-directed or managed accounts that you can go and open up yourself, whether that's, working with your bank, an online source, a custodian, something like that. You can do that on your own and manage it, or an advisor, of course, can help you with that as well, okay? So two different categories, if you will. First category, employer-sponsored plans. These are going to be all the fours, as I call them. So 401ks, which are probably the most common among public and private companies. Most common plan that you had to have access to, a 401k. A 403b as well, which is going to be like a 401k, more so for healthcare and education professionals. 457Bs are usually for government employees and first responders. Simple IRAs are very similar to 401ks, but that's going to be more of a small business would have a simple IRA. So someone who has, under 20 or 30 employees is going to maybe have a simple IRA versus a 401k. And then TSPs are going to be specifically for federal employees. So again, these type of accounts are all going to be really a benefit that the company offers to its employees. There are going to be these accounts that you can save into specifically if you work for that company, okay? And we'll come back to some of the various caveats of each of these types of plans here in a second. But these are going to be the most common workplace plans that you would have access to. So if you don't know if you have access to these and you're working for a company, I'd recommend that you contact, maybe your manager or HR or someone that would know what benefits you have access to see if you can take advantage of these, okay? And these are going to be all accounts that you can save into for the long term, okay, and gain some tax benefits because these are geared mainly towards retirement. So we'll come back to these in a second, but again, those are going to be your employer-sponsored plans that you'd be able to save into, okay? Now the types of self-directed plans, these are not offered in the workplace. This is something that you could go out and do on your own, are going to be the traditional IRA, which is probably the most common individual plan. The Roth IRA, which is very similar to the traditional IRA in some ways and then very different in others, okay? This is going to be more about tax-free savings. We'll come back to that. The SEP IRA, which is going to be for self-employed folks and people who own businesses. And then the solo 401k, which is really going to be for business owners, okay? So these are going to be just a few examples of plans that you would have access to or that you'd be able to use and utilize if you don't have access to that employer-sponsored plan, okay? So two different types of categories, again, of retirement plans. There are some common characteristics, though, that they all share, okay? And this is going to be kind of just a general overview and a generalization, of course. So number one, these are accounts that are intended for long-term saving, okay? These aren't going to be like the checking account or savings account that you have at the bank where you can put the money in and just take it out if you need it, okay? These are going to be accounts that you typically cannot touch the funds that you put in until you're 59 and a half. There's an asterisk there because some plans like 401ks and 403bs may allow access to the funds before then, but typically it's going to be, maybe 50 or 55. So again, this is a long-term savings account, okay? And then some 401ks even offer loan provisions. Honestly, we recommend that you don't really think of your 401k as kind of a place that you can take a loan from. Same thing with Roth IRAs. You're actually able to get to some of the money that's in there as well. We really just want these accounts to be thought of as a long-term savings vehicle, okay? So just think about it as any of the types of accounts that I use for retirement or a long-term commitment, okay? Because here's the thing, if you do get to those funds or if you try to take those funds out before you've met the requirements of 59 and a half typically, there's a huge penalty involved, okay? 10% is the most common, okay? You'd have to pay a 10% penalty and in most cases taxes on the money that you draw out of those accounts. So again, these are long-term savings accounts, all right? We don't want to touch the funds because again, what's the purpose? It's a retirement account. That's the purpose of the funds of the account, so it's for long-term savings, okay? Now the next common characteristic among these accounts is that the contributions are typically limited into how much you can put into the account each year, okay? We'll provide a little tax summary, a 2023 summary that summarizes the max contributions that you can put into these accounts. But for instance, for IRAs and Roth IRAs, the most you can put into those accounts each year is going to be $6,500. And if you're above the age of 50, $7,500, okay? So you're limited as to how much you can put into. There's also going to be some eligibility differences for folks or eligibility stipulations for folks that may make a certain amount. So above a certain amount of income, you may not be eligible to contribute to these accounts. And again, 401ks, 403bs, all the work-sponsored plans are going to have different contribution limits. And that's one thing that is favorable for those work-sponsored plans, by the way, is that you can typically put more than the 65 or the 7,500 into those accounts, quite a bit more actually. So just keep that in mind. You can only put so much into these accounts per year. You can't just deposit, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 into your IRA at one time, all right? You're capped at a certain amount. And again, we'll provide a nice little resource here that goes over those limits, okay? So you can only put so much in per year. Next up, a common characteristic, specifically for the employer-sponsored plans, is that sometimes an employer will match the contribution that you put in to the plan. Now this is huge, again. Like I said earlier, those plans are considered benefits, right? You get a job, you might ask, what benefits do you offer? Sometimes it's an insurance plan, paid time off. Retirement plan is huge, especially if they provide a match. How this works is typically an employer will match, let's just use 3%. They'll match 3% of your salary, meaning that if you make $50,000, okay, 3% of $50,000 is going to be $1,500. Okay, I had to think quick math there. 3% of $50,000, $1,500. You would be able to put $1,500 into the plan, and your employer is immediately going to match that $1,500. Okay. If you put in more than that, they're not going to match more than that 3%. If you put in less than that, they're going to just match dollar for dollar. So dollar for dollar, up to a certain percentage of your salary is what they would match. That's 100% return on your money, okay? So it's a very powerful tool if you want to save into a 401k or a work-sponsored plan that you can take advantage of a lot of benefits there, okay? So sometimes employers will match your contributions up to a certain percentage of your salary, which is, again, a question if you're unaware, unsure of what your employer matches. Check with HR, check with a higher up at your company to understand what benefits you can take advantage of, okay? So the match is a huge benefit to having a 401k or, again, a work-sponsored plan. Important to note, the non-work-sponsored plans, there is not going to be a match, okay? So sometimes folks will ask, what's a better way to save? in a Roth IRA that I can open up on my own, or in the 401k that I have at work. And a lot of times it comes down to what kind of a match are you going to get, okay, if there is a match at all. Next up, pre-tax accounts. So that's going to be the 401k, the traditional IRA, and really any type of an account that doesn't have the word Roth, R-O-T-H. Any type of account that isn't labeled as a Roth account is going to be what's called a pre-tax account, okay? These pre-tax accounts give you some tax advantages, okay? The main one being that when the money goes into the account, all right, it is all pre-tax, meaning that you don't have to pay federal tax, state tax, Medicare, Social Security. You don't have to pay all those taxes on your pay stub on the money that's going in to that 401k. And in turn, the money that goes into the account grows what's called tax deferred. You pay taxes on the back end when you pull the money out, okay? So same thing with a traditional IRA. When you put the money into the traditional IRA, you get a tax benefit up front, typically being able to deduct that from your income. So you get tax advantages in the beginning, but when you pull the money out later in life, that is when you would pay taxes. So you would pay taxes on the withdrawal. So again, they give tax benefits to certain folks who are eligible by putting money into that account, so you can maybe decrease your income to take advantage of lower taxes. But we'll come back to that concept in a minute, because on the reverse side of the coin, you have after-tax accounts or Roth accounts. You can have a Roth 401k, a Roth 403b, or even a Roth IRA, which kind of works in reverse here, okay? Meaning that the money that goes into that account is not going to get the tax benefits of being able to lower your income, okay? But in turn, that money grows tax deferred in the account, and then when you pull the money out later in life on eligible withdrawals, that is, it's tax-free, okay? So put the money in, you pay tax on it when it goes into the account, it grows tax deferred and tax free, and then when you pull the money out later, maybe in retirement, you don't have to pay taxes on it then, okay? So two different routes that you can kind of take when it comes to retirement savings, pre-tax or after-tax, okay? Now, a lot of times we'll get the question of what's better. I'm offered, this is a common scenario, I'm offered a Roth 401k and a Roth 401k and a traditional 401k, right? Pre-tax and after-tax. Which one is better? There really is no one-size-fits-all answer for this, okay? And also, let me, quick disclaimer here, disclosure, this may be a question that you should pose to your accountant, okay? Which should I take advantage of? The pre-tax or traditional option, or the after-tax or Roth option, okay? Because there really is no one-size-fits-all answer to this, okay? This is my opinion that I'm about to give you here. Honestly, I favor, especially for the younger generation, maybe the after-tax option or the Roth option, okay? Reason being is that I'm not sure where taxes are going to be in the future for the younger generations. If you think taxes are going to be higher in the future, then by the numbers, by math, the Roth IRA is usually the better option, meaning that it's better to pay the taxes on that money now while taxes are perceivably lower versus when you have to take the money out in the future. We don't know where taxes are going to be. Remove that uncertainty of if taxes are higher by just paying the taxes now. So that's just, again, my opinion. Honestly, a conversation that you should have with your financial advisor or with your accountant to see which is a better move for you. But typically, I favor the the Roth options if you do have that available to you. Okay, but not saying that pre-tax is bad. Of course, our clients know that we preach what's called tax diversification. Having money in both the pre-tax bucket and the after-tax bucket is not an issue. But again, if you think taxes are going up in the future or you want to remove any kind of uncertainty in your retirement plan, the Roth is, in my opinion, the better option, okay? And I use this analogy, this picture here of comparing the two options, right? Pre-tax versus after-tax, is where do you want to pay the tax? On the seed, which is when the money goes in, okay, which is the Roth option, or would you rather pay it later on the harvest, which is the pre-tax option? So the Roth is the seed, the pre-tax or traditional is going to be the harvest. Where do you want to pay the taxes, okay? So just a little analogy that I use to keep in mind or to remember that. So we've gone over the various types of bowls that you would have access to, okay, the different types of savings accounts. Let's just do a quick overview then of what actually makes those accounts fluctuate in value or appreciate, hopefully over the long term, which is the cereal analogy, okay, or the various types of investments. And there are going to be a plethora of different investments that you have access to in these bowls, okay? Different types of investments that you can use. Here's just a couple examples of them. The most common, I'm sure that folks have heard of, is stocks are an investment, bonds, CDs are an investment, even cash is technically considered an investment, I suppose. Mutual funds, ETFs, but let's just boil it down to kind of the simple ones, because there's some more complex ones, like of course everyone knows what a cryptocurrency is these days. Annuities can be a little bit more complex, commodities, pretty complex, but to boil it down to kind of the simple or the basics of investments, the most common, especially with a 401k that you'll have access to, is maybe a mutual fund, okay? A mutual fund is really, just to summarize it, a group of stocks or a bundle of stocks that are packaged together into one fund to achieve what we call diversification, meaning that a stock on its own, that's a share of a company, right? You can have stock in Apple, Ford, Amazon, Sony. You can have stocks from all over the world if you want. You can have U.S. companies, big companies, small stocks, big stocks, or large companies, that is. You can have many different types of stocks. A mutual fund is just a way to group those stocks together so that you have a little bit more diversification and you don't have to necessarily go out and cherry pick each stock that you want, okay? So most common in a 401k, you may have access to a mutual fund. An ETF is very similar to a mutual fund. Main difference being is that there's not a manager on that ETF typically, so usually the funds will be a little bit less, okay? But let's just stick with mutual funds as kind of the most common example, maybe the most familiar example for folks watching this. The 401k that you have, if you have access to a 401k, is going to have a bunch of different mutual funds that you can choose from typically. The simplest form of a 401k mutual fund would be the target date fund, which is going to be an investment that has a specific date tied to it. So that might be let's just say your 401k is serviced by T. Rowe Price. It might be the T. Rowe Price 2055 fund, which is going to be a mutual fund managed for someone who expects to retire around 2055. Okay, that's another, if we're looking at pros and cons of the work-sponsored plans versus the self-directed plans. Of course, like I said earlier, major benefit to the employee-sponsored plans is that there's sometimes a match involved, right? The disadvantage sometimes to those plans versus the self-managed plans is that you have a limited list of options or a limited menu as to what you can have access to in terms of saving or in terms of investing. So you might have a set list of mutual funds offered by that provider, where if you open up an IRA or a Roth IRA on your own with a financial advisor, or even, again, with a custodian directly online or something like that, you really typically will have access to anything, virtually anything that's out there. So just one pro and con. But again, the idea is that there are many different types of investments out there. All of them have unique characteristics. Risk is involved with most investments. Really, any investment out there carries some sort of risk. So you have to be careful when it comes to picking an investment or choosing an investment. I always say rely on, number one, if it is a work-sponsored plan, there's an individual, typically someone who's a fiduciary, okay, which a fiduciary is someone who has to look out for your best interest first. There's usually a fiduciary with the employer-sponsored plan or a plan administrator that will be able to give you some advice as to, based on what your options are, what your situation looks like, this is how you should invest. They're there to give you investment advice. If you're working with a financial advisor, the financial advisor is going to give you advice on what investments you should pick. So don't let it overwhelm you, the different types of investments that you have access to. There are professionals out there that is their job to give you advice. You don't need to be an expert on investments to save and invest for retirement, okay? So rely on those professionals' advice if you have questions about the investments, because again, it can be it is very important to assess your situation when it comes to picking the investments. Just as a kind of insight as to how we advise our clients, whenever we consider an investment, whether it's for a 401k or maybe a more short or immediate term goal, what we look at is three things when it comes to choosing that investment. What's the goal of the money would be the first thing, right? What's the goal or the purpose of that money? Of course, if it's for retirement planning, the goal is retirement, right? To supplement your income so you can meet your expenses in the future. That's the goal. The second thing would be then, what is the time horizon of those funds? Again, if it's all about retirement planning, you may have a long time horizon. If you're right on the cusp of retiring, though, if you're watching this and you might be retiring in 2 or 3 years, your time horizon is going to be completely different than someone who's just getting started. So you have to keep that in mind. What's the time horizon on the money? And then last but not least, we talked about it earlier, what is your risk tolerance then? Your personal risk tolerance that you have, okay, how much risk you're okay with accepting, and then what is your risk capacity, which I would define as how much risk should you be taking when you compare the top 2 bullet points of what your goal is and then what your time horizon is, how much risk should you be taking then? These three together will typically help you choose an investment. And again, considerations that you should bring to your financial advisor, or if again you're saving into a 401k, there will be someone there to help you make that decision. So just some insight as to what we think about when we choose investments, because it is important. That's what actually grows within the account to, again, hopefully appreciate the assets over the long term. Okay? Now, another question that I get often is, how much exactly should I be saving for retirement? And then what are some best practices to how to go about doing that, okay? Now again, some of this is my opinion here. This is our opinion here at Montgomery Financial about how much you should be saving. There's the 15% rule, okay, which is just a common sort of rule that some experts have recommended people look into, the idea of saving at least 15% of your annual income towards retirement. Okay, so 15%, again, there's no one size fits all typically when it comes to anything financial planning, but especially this, it may be a little bit more, it may be a little bit less based on your situation, but as a good rule of thumb, we want to get to 15% towards retirement savings. Okay, so save 15%. What's the best way to go about that then? Because you might be thinking to yourself like, hey, that sounds great, easier said than done, saving 15% towards retirement. How can I go about doing that? Okay, that sounds like a lot of money, right? How do you go about doing it? We recommend setting up what are called automatic contributions. So of course, if you have a 401k, you can set that 401k to automatically draw out 10, 15, whatever percentage it is per pay period. Okay, so that's automatic. If it's an IRA or a Roth IRA or a non-work plan, you can do the same thing with your bank account typically, where you can have the money go to the IRA or the Roth IRA on an automatic kind of schedule there, okay? What's the benefit of doing that though? Why would I recommend automatic contributions? Well, it does a couple things. Number one, it builds discipline, okay? Meaning that that contribution is going to happen automatically, okay? And again, the 15% rule, maybe you don't start right there, right? Don't jump in head first necessarily. Maybe you start with 5%, okay? You're saving 5% of your annual income. Your lifestyle will end up adjusting around having that, not having rather, that money in your bank account each month. It's going directly automatically to a retirement account. It builds up that discipline, that familiarity of having less money to go and then spend on other things. You're prioritizing, and we're going to go over here in a second, paying yourself first by saving and doing those automatic contributions. So I think it builds discipline, it builds good habits by having it come out automatically. It's out of sight, out of mind. You don't even get to touch the money most of the time, especially if it's coming out of your paycheck automatically. It builds up discipline, okay? The second thing that this is beneficial for is going back to the investing side of things, more so than the savings, dollar cost averaging, okay? It's the idea of buying shares consistently throughout the year over a period of time, averaging the cost, and then getting in at different share prices. It's dollar cost averaging has some benefits that come in on the investment side more than anything else. Okay, so another reason why automatic contributions are useful. And then last but not least, best practice is to just have the mindset of paying yourself first. Okay, again, I know it's easier said than done. Saving for retirement. Most people say, how am I going to budget for that? Okay. think of it, and again, how you budget for that is by setting up automatic contributions, figuring out a percentage, okay, and then working your way up. But the mindset to have is you need to pay yourself first, okay? Hopefully the information I went over earlier about what retirement income is going to look like plays into this, because like I said, the younger generations especially are going to be reliant more so on their savings and Social Security. We're not going to have a lot of pensions out there, okay? So you have to pay yourself first. You have to build up that nest egg so that in the future you're not worried about having to work until you're, in your late 70s, even early 80s. All right, because statistically, the average age of a retiree in the U.S. has gone up over the past, couple decades here. All right, it just continues to go up because we're more reliant now on those nest eggs and Social Security. We don't have those pensions to rely on. So you have to prioritize, get your priorities straight of setting yourself up for a successful financial future by paying yourself first, okay? And then another common question we get then is, when should I prioritize saving for retirement? Like I said earlier, there's no, it's never too early, it's never too late. But if you're in a position right now where you're in your first job, or maybe you've been working for a while, a lot of times people ask, well, when is the right time, right? When should I prioritize this over other financial goals? I love going back to Dave Ramsey's baby steps, okay, which is a very basic way of thinking about financial planning. And I always say, look, prioritize paying down any kind of debt that you have, okay, consumer debt. So student loans, credit cards, auto loans, things like that, that needs to be a priority. The mortgage can wait. Okay, and you can see Dave's baby steps here, which we'll go over in a second, but prioritize paying down the debt first before you jump in head first to retirement, okay? If you look at Dave's baby steps here, his first baby step is to build up a $1,000 emergency fund, okay? His second step is to then pay off all debt that you have other than the house, okay? Using what he calls the debt snowball effect. If you've never heard of that, I recommend that you Google Dave Ramsey snowball, debt snowball. Gives a great strategy of paying down mountains of debt. And I've had clients of mine and friends of mine use this strategy to pay off, mountains and mountains and piles of debt in a very low amount of time, okay? So it's the idea of just paying down, hyper-focusing on one debt and then moving on to the next one, okay? But we won't get too far into that. The next baby step then is to build up a 3 or 6 month emergency fund, okay? This is going to be dependent upon where you're at in life, whether you're single, married, you have children in the house or not. That's going to kind of depend on what your emergency funds should look like. But after you have that emergency fund, and by the way, the importance of baby step 3 of building up that emergency fund is so that if you do go into any kind of debt, okay, so that if you do have an unexpected expense arise, you don't have to go back into debt by putting it on a credit card, okay? Maybe your transmission in your car goes up or you need, to repair something. You don't have to put it on that high interest rate credit card. You have that emergency fund built up for that. So that's the importance there. The next baby step then is where, hey, I'd recommend you look at saving for retirement, specifically trying to get to that 15% mark, okay? So Dave's baby steps are great at kind of breaking it down into an easy to digest version of when to prioritize, how to prioritize. I will say though that if you do have a 401k that offers a match, sometimes you can kind of, I don't want to say get out of order here with the baby steps, but taking advantage of that match, I can't tell you how critical that is, how crucial that is. That's 100% return on your money. There's no investment out there, again, my opinion at least, there's no investment out there that can give you 100% return guaranteed, okay, on what you put into it. So take advantage of that match, even if you're trying to build up some of the other areas by paying down debt and building up the emergency fund. Sometimes the match percentage at least would make sense, okay? So hopefully that was helpful. We're going to jump over to the case study, though, to kind of tie all this together, and then I'll be back to wrap it up after that. Okay? All right. So let's jump into our case study here. All right. Tying everything together that we discussed, about thinking about the future, starting from square one, going through a whole case study using our financial planning software. So, of course, our client should be familiar with this interface using our financial planning software, eMoney. So what I've done here, just to kind of prove a point and give you a little bit of some numbers to work off of in a case study, is I've uploaded Mr. Sample. Okay, Mr. Sample is our kind of fake sample client, if you will. And you can see here that he is 38 years old. we're going to just show a single here, or one person rather, to kind of give you a clean and easy example. He's going to be he is 38 years old. He's going to retire around 65. That's his retirement age we're going to put into the system. And then he has a life expectancy out until age 90. Okay. So just kind of putting in some really basic base facts, as we call them. Right here, we can see his net worth. He has an emergency fund because, again, very important to build those up. He has $10,000 in an emergency fund, and then he has nothing in his 401k that he has through work, okay? Now, the 401k at work, it's also important to note, is actually matching 5% of whatever Mr. Sample puts in, 5% of his salary based on what he puts in, and he's not taking advantage of it right now. You can see that right here. He is not contributing anything to his 401k, so he's not taking advantage of that match. In terms of income for Mr. Sample, he has around $60,000 a year between his salary and bonus at work. What you'll notice as well is that I put a placeholder in of $25,000 for Social Security once Mr. Sample gets to that full retirement age of 67. Okay. Now, the software automatically calculates for things like taxes, inflation. We've also shown that throughout time, Mr. Sample here is going to get a nice little bump each year. We're just going to say that his salary actually stays in line with inflation, just to kind of make it realistic there. Okay. And again, inflation around 3.69% per year has been the average. Expense-wise, we're going to show Mr. Sample spending around $45,000 a year, okay? But when we actually add taxes to that, what it ends up looking like is Mr. Sample is in what's called a break even, okay? So let me pop over here to the cash flow report, meaning that, in a way, he's living paycheck to paycheck. It's not uncommon for folks to be doing this, where everything that is coming in terms of income is going right out. And you can see that here by this chart, this red and green line. The green line shows income, the red line shows expenses, and you can see that those are right up and even. So he's at that break-even point, and you can even see here down on the chart the same thing. So here's his $60,000 going in. His total expenses, so that includes his living expenses and taxes. He has a little bit left over at the end of each year. Okay, so almost a break even there. And what you'll notice again with this chart is that it shows his expenses going up throughout time because of inflation, as we discussed earlier. And then same thing with his salary. We're just going to say that that keeps in line with inflation as well. Okay, so let's tie it all together then and take a look at the decision center. This is where we like to go to look at various scenarios in the plan, and just with the base facts alone. So again, Mr. Sample, 38 years old, making $60,000 a year, not taking advantage of his 401k right now, so he's not saving anything. What does it look like? Okay. Well, what you can see here is this is showing Mr. Sample's portfolio value. He has a little bit of savings in the cash flow, if you remember back. So he's, putting away, I think it's, a couple $1,000s a year, building up that emergency fund basically. But what you can see here is when he retires in 2050, he has to spend everything in his portfolio in his bank account because he doesn't have income anymore. So he actually runs out of money pretty early on. You can see his assets last basically until when he retires at age 65, but it's shown up here as 64. So the assets don't last very long. Of course, our clients are very familiar with the Monte Carlo, but if you're not, the Monte Carlo analysis puts Mr. Sample's scenario through 1,000 different market scenarios, good markets, bad markets, and then kind of average markets there, and gives a probability of success for his plan, which success is not running out of money in retirement. And you can see here that Mr. Sample's at 0% because, again, he's not saving anything. And if we were to take a closer look at what this looks like from a cash flow perspective, I actually prefer this chart to the previous one we went over. This is an interactive cash flow, and it really tells a story for us. So you can see here, starting on the left-hand side, Mr. Sample's salary each and every year. Okay, so he's getting those bumps, like I said, and it's just meeting his expenses. This red line is going to represent his expenses. And then right here, this little sun shows when Mr. Sample retires. You can see that he doesn't have any income at that point, so he needs to withdraw something from his savings, okay, because we're not assuming Like I said earlier, pensions aren't very common these days. Mr. Sample doesn't have a pension, so it's just going to be Social Security and his savings. And you can see here that he needs to withdraw everything from that emergency fund that he had been slowly building up there. And his money runs out immediately. Okay. And then at some point when he turns on his Social Security, that's what this dark blue bar then represents. You can see it's not even going to touch what his expenses are, because again, his expenses are indexed for inflation. So 0% probability of success. He doesn't have enough money to retire at this point. This is not a good picture by any means. But again, I picked an age 38. That's how we have Mr. Sample in here as someone who's kind of right in the middle, right? It's still not, like I said earlier, it's never too early. It is never too late to start planning for retirement. It's not too late for Mr. Sample. So let's look at the concept of putting together a savings plan, okay? And what I've done here is I've added a savings plan of 15%, okay? 15% of our sample here of his income is going to go towards his 401k now, okay? Now, what that does is we've actually had to decrease his living expenses a little bit. Let's see if I can click into this. So yes, we have to decrease his living expenses from $45,000 to $38,000. That's that adjustment that I said that you will have in your lifestyle if, again, you set things on autopilot. If you set those savings up so that they're on autopilot and coming out automatically, I promise your lifestyle will change around that, okay? So we've decreased his living expenses, upped his 401k savings to 15%, but we're not investing this, okay? Remember earlier, there's a difference between investing and saving. He is just saving right now, okay? So all this money is going into just cash in his 401k, which isn't what I'd recommend, but just want to show, kind of prove a point here that this is what the effect is on just saving, all right? We'll look at investing here in a second. But let's go over here to the Decision Center. Looking at the total portfolio value over his lifetime, you can see that by saving 15% per year throughout his working years from 2023 all the way until he retires, he gains almost $545,000, okay? And his assets last a little bit longer now until age 70. So you can see here that green bar, these green bars on top of the blue bars show an increase to his portfolio value. But again, he hasn't invested the funds, so they are just sitting in cash. The Monte Carlo is still going to show a 0%, unfortunately, because again, it's not enough to just save. He's got to save and invest. So we'll come back to that. You can see here 0%. And then the cash flow is going to look pretty similar, but he actually is going to make it a little bit longer. And you can see here again, that red line getting indexed for inflation. Mr. Sample retires in 2050. And then at that point, to meet his living expenses, he withdraws from his portfolio. And then at that point, he turns on Social Security, and then his assets last a couple more years, but it's not enough. Okay. Now, a quick point that I do want to pull up before I forget. Remember, we're showing his expenses right now around, we had to decrease them, but before it was around $45,000 a year. Okay. And then now it went down to, that's total expenses. So that's adding taxes. His expenses are we put him down to $38,000. So this is what's amazing. Okay. Is remember earlier, we've been talking a lot about inflation, $38,000. Okay. In today's money, in terms of expenses, in 2023 all the way to 2050. So what is that? 27 years. Okay. 27 years from now, that same $38,000 in expenses, we're anticipating it to be, he's going to need $102,000. So it almost, it almost triples at that point, more than doubles. Okay. And that's the power. That's the, how sneaky inflation can be, the cost of living going up each year. So just keep that in mind. I want to just prove a quick point there that that's what, in this case at least, inflation has an effect on expenses. Okay. So now let's put it all together then, saving and investing. So it's great that Mr. Sample's, been saving, but let's just say that now he adds that last bit in there, which is he invests in his 401k. All right. He has options in his 401k, all the way between, stocks and ETFs and mutual funds. We're just going to say that he kind of puts things in what we call a target date fund. And we're actually going to show, I think, a relatively conservative growth rate here. Yeah. So we're going to show a growth rate of 9.81% per year from 2023 until he retires. And then, like most folks typically do, like we recommend a lot of times, if you then anticipate living on that money, we're going to downshift his portfolio maybe into a little bit more of a conservative position there. Okay. Now, there's some experts out there that say with an aggressive portfolio, you should be able to get 12% per year. I'm not saying I disagree or agree with that necessarily. We're just showing a little bit more conservative in that sense of below 10% per year. So on average, around 9.81% per year is what we're going to have this thing growing at. Okay. And again, the results speak for themselves. It's pretty amazing the power of compound interest, okay? The power of that portfolio growing each year at 9.81%. And you can see that overall, we've now added 26 years of funding, okay? And another $1.9 million gained over the long term. What does that do in the Monte Carlo? Let's take a look. Monte Carlo summary, that puts him up to 85%. All right. And I'm sure there's still more that we could do. This is, of course, just a very basic sample case here. There's a lot more that we could do, most likely, in his financial plan to try and get him to 100%. But here's the thing. We aim to get our clients above 80%. Okay. If we're above 80, we're happy. And he's at 85. Okay. Which is great. That's a very great probability of success for him. And if we take a look at the cash flow, it tells us a story again, showing that at this point, Mr. Sample could afford to retire at age 65 in 2050, and then he can withdraw from his portfolio, and then his withdrawals and Social Security are going to sustain him throughout his life. Okay. So again, a lot more tweaking that we could do to this plan. It's just to show you the power of, steps one. Let's go back here. Steps one, not doing anything. Step two, actually saving 15%. And then step three, saving and investing over, again, a 27-year period in this case, showing the power that has. Okay, so this by no means is meant to be a one-size-fits-all case study. It's just to give you a kind of an average or a basic idea of how powerful saving, being disciplined in saving, and then the power of compounded interest by investing, how powerful that can be over the long run, and how that has an effect on your financial plan in the future. Being able to have that, again, that luxury to get to that work optional lifestyle when you can maybe enjoy some things. So there's still more planning that we could probably do in this case, but just wanted to show you the basics. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. And that's the end of the case study. All right, folks, so that is everything that I had planned to go over with you now for this coaching class here. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some of the information useful. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment down below. My contact information is here as well. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be more than happy to ask or answer those questions for you. But again, forward this to someone that you may think would benefit from the information, whether it's a child, grandchild, niece, nephew, friend, whatever it may be. That's what the aim of this video was to kind of tie it all together, understanding, the basics of what a retirement plan, or retirement savings plan would look like, why it's important to save for retirement, and I hope that case study kind of brought all that together for you, okay? And then last but not least, again, I hope you're having a great summer here. Hope you enjoyed the coaching class. We're trying to build up our little channel here on YouTube, so if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button on this video, hitting subscribe to our content, or subscribing to our channel, that ensures that you'll never miss out on any of the content that we have for you here. And again, it was a pleasure, and I hope you all have a great day. Bye now.